Rock and roll. Hello, welcome back, everyone. Hope you've all stayed from our previous segment that got a bit heated at times, but we're here now for some friendlier discussions.
I'm sure it's going to get more heated. Don't worry.
Yeah. So, in following with last week's Talkwind episode, we're going to be talking new wave of British heavy metal, which was a pretty major movement in the mid to late 70s into the 80s, early 80s. And what a time to be alive, if only. In fact, I did contact my dad about this because he basically lived through it, and he was giving me tips on
like peak teenagehood during this time. So imagine that.
Yeah, movement was pretty popular. Spawned some of the most well-known rock and metal bands today: Iron Maiden, Def Leppard, Saxon, Motorhead. I'm repping them today.
I had to have a meeting, so I'm wearing a dress and a jumper. Sorry, not repping the Rams much.
I was going to say, if you've got any Maiden t-shirts, stick them on. But oh well. So after Motorhead was founded in 1975, this new genre of music started to come about. A whole new movement of people infusing the sort of anger of punk, but with a bit more apolitical, just breaking away from the metal that came in the earlier 70s and producing something that was really heavy and to be honest, cool, and wearing leather. And
the foundations of quite a lot of our music tastes, I think.
Yeah, basically, yeah, getting away from the politics of punk and going back to the heavy chugging riffs that come with metal.
Yeah, I think that was important as well, because like the punk era, excuse me, is obviously amazing in its own right, but it was so heavily politicized that what was originally just meant to be a general fuck the system kind of message, where it was meant to just withhold anger, it did become really, really politicized, and it polarized music for what it was. And it meant that it was creating sort of gang cultures amongst people depending on what they listen to, whereas heavy metal managed to sort of bring it back to its roots and be like, hey, we can hate everyone, and that's okay.
Whilst drinking beer and listening to really loud music.
Probably having sex at some point. This is how heavy metal works now. And it was that nice sort of reintroduction back into we can hate equally.
Yeah, which is what metal's really all about. So if you listened last week,
hateful people.
If you listened to last week's Talkwind episode, you'll have heard a bit about Motorhead, but I just want to mention them as sort of the landmark beginnings of the new wave British heavy metal movement. If you've got any suggestions, Tanya, what should people listen to if they've never heard Motorhead, besides last week's Talkwind episode?
If they've never listened to Motorhead, okay, so start with like No Remorse. That's a given. If you're not immediately listening to that album, you should do so. My personal favorites come from weirdly like 2009.
You sound like Owen now.
Pardon?
You sound like Owen. He does like his post 21st century Motorhead.
Well, it's just the thing is about Motorhead is they're eternal. Like, as much as Lemmy's voice got a little bit, I don't want to offend his ghost, but bad towards the end, clinical. It still had that same era of feel to it that we were just discussing, that very much like we're all a union, but also fuck those guys in the loving hate kind of way. So albums like Orgasmatron, fucking fundamental, Motorhead's Motorhead, Bomber, Overkill, the very traditional ones. And then if you want to expand a little bit more into sort of more specialized forms, I'm a big fan of The World Is Yours from 2010. I think that is one that you can get inspired by, shall we say. And then you've also got things like, what other ones are there? I'm like reading off my shelf at home thinking like,
No Sleep Till Hammersmith is a good one to start with too, because it's a sort of a collection of their big songs. Live album's always good.
Yeah, just the album Rock and Roll is a good album from 1987.
Yeah. Other bands that kind of cemented the movement, people like Thin Lizzy, UFO, Judas Priest. Judas Priest were kind of had been going for yonks by the time the sort of Norbum era started. But their album British Steel in 1980 is pretty fundamental. Yeah, pretty classic album, that. I think that's definitely one to listen to.
I'm lucky enough to have seen Judas Priest.
That's cool.
How he is still of the age that he is and managing to put on still such a great show is a feat of nature. Judas Priest have always had running consistent themes also, like whenever he comes out and plays Painkiller, he always rides a motorcycle onto stage, which is a big stage up. It's pretty fucking metal, bruh. But British Steel was quite possibly one of the best albums
fucking
ever
metal.
created.
Yeah, British Steel is a classic. My dad's first album.
Is it?
Yeah, apparently. Yeah.
Screaming for Vengeance, also an important one. Turbo, also an important one.
That very much
if you haven't listened,
sound. Sort of
if you haven't listened to Priest, starting with British Steel, Screaming for Vengeance, and Turbo is the way to go. And then listen to Firepower, which was released in 2018, because it shows that they're still somehow just as fucking awesome in terms of lyricism, in terms of skill, and just continuing to write what has same themes as it did all the way back in the 80s.
And don't forget to listen to some of their older stuff from the 70s, like Rock-A-Roller, because it kind of contextualizes where they got to and how different their stuff later sounds.
Sad Wings of Destiny, 1976.
They're basically unrecognizable before British Steel. Thin Lizzy's 76 album Jailbreak basically solidified them as a pretty popular band. But Nightlife from 1974 is another really good one. Very funky. Phil Lynnett's bass playing is pretty legendary. So those other ones to listen to.
Is one of those albums that if you are a metalhead and you don't own this album, I'm disappointed in you.
It's a very well-known one. And UFO, one of my favorite bands, classic, featuring 18-year-old Michael Schenker before he formed his own group. Phenomenon is the one I'd recommend you listen to. But these are all bands who were popular before the Nwabum movement even started. But they're good to listen to just to see how the movement kind of started and the bands that influenced the movement itself. Now, I think one band that everyone knows and might not know is fundamental Nwabum is Iron Maiden. Mm-hmm. Absolute classic, very early 80s. Most one of the most successful products of metal. I mean, they're still popular today. Everyone knows their logos. Everyone knows their songs. But if you've never listened to them before, where should you go, Tanya?
Well, that depends what style of Maiden you're going for, because Maiden are famous for the fact that their albums are somewhat themed and pretty damn wacky. And more importantly, Maiden's albums are always really highly contested as to which albums are the best. And it's not like a sort of Black Sabbath argument where it's one album or another. It can be one of tens of different albums. Like, I personally absolutely love Power Slave. I know people who tell me that it's absolute wank and don't ever want to listen to it, and they prefer things like Somewhere in Time. 2 albums you should go and listen to if you've never seen them before. But always, I would say, start with Iron Maiden's self-titled album, because that's where the fundamentals are. I love Iron Maiden. There's also a cover of it, if you can find it in a vinyl, where it has... My dad should be here to tell you this, but there are Iron Maiden vinyl albums that are worth thousands of pounds because of a small misprint in the top right corner. Fun fact. Yeah. If you ever go to a vinyl shop, look for weird and wacky vinyl covers, especially if it's Iron Maiden. Number of the Beast, fundamental. I also really, really like Seventh Son, and again, people think it's utter crap, but I love it. It really, there's probably sort of the noughties you don't really have to listen to much. There's a lot in
those first 5 albums, from Iron Maiden through to Power Slave, I think are the most Nwabum you're going to get. So if you really want to hear the fundamentals of this movement, those ones I go for. Killers is personally my favorite Iron Maiden album. So I think there's 5 albums. Good suggestion across the board to listen to. Saxon. I don't really know much about Saxon.
I love Saxon. So
I know, what is it? Something in leather. Something about leather? They like
Denim
leather,
and leather.
don't they? Denim and leather.
Wow. So I really like Saxon. I think Saxon was the second band I ever saw. I was 11 years old. And I went to go and see them. And I remember being very much new to the concept of gigging and mainly knowing 2 songs from Saxon, one of them being Denim and Leather. And I was really, really sad because at the time I didn't understand the concept of, what are they called? Encores. And we got to like the end of the set and they'd left the stage and I started like crying, 10-year-old me standing in the banisters, just having a bit of a fit. And Dad was like, calm down, it's fine. And then they come out.
There's one more coming.
Say that again, sorry.
There's another one coming. Don't worry.
Yeah, don't worry, kid. And all the people looking at me like, oh, isn't she cute? And then I turned into a fucking crackhead, but here we are. So Saxon, in a similar fashion to Judas Priest, have their fundamentals, have a sort of section where you're like, don't really need that. And then come out producing Thunderbolt in 2018. What a fucking album. If you've never listened to Saxon, you can start there if you want, because it is phenomenal. And contains vocals from the lead singer of Amon Amarth. So if that's your kind of thing as well, there's obviously a running theme where he's allowed to be in certain songs. Thunderbolt is an awesome, awesome song, harking back to the styles coming from albums like Denim and Leather and Strong Arm of the Law, 2 other albums that you should listen to. If you haven't already, I would highly recommend that you do so.
Yeah. Very, very of the time, very Nwabum Saxon. They're one of the biggest bands of the movement. I've literally just got down on my notes. Tanya can chat about them.
I love Saxon.
Founded in 1977. Tanya can chat about them.
Yeah, I mean Saxon,
but they're not one to skip.
They're still touring to this day. They're still doing the festival circuits. They still sound phenomenal. Like problems that you find with bands like Skid Row because Sebastian Bach left, Motley Crue, places like that. They all died out a little bit, and their style was not maintained with old age, shall we say. It was not graceful for them, but it has been for Saxon. He's got this long flowing grey silver hair. His battle jacket that he's had since the 80s still runs up and down that fucking stage. Saxon are awesome to watch live. If you ever get the opportunity, please do so, because if you're looking for an intro into new age, this is the way to go. New wave even.
Saxon. Angel Witch are another big one that people might know from the Nwabum movement, formed in 76 in London.
I'm not a big Angel Witch fan.
No? I like the self-titled album Angel Witch, which features the song Angel Witch by Angel Witch. It's a classic, and for me, listening to the album really shows how British the movement was. It's just they sing with such, they've quite strong accents. You can tell that it was a fundamentally British movement, and if anything, when the Americans joined in, it kind of ruined it all.
Yeah,
to be brutally honest,
we're yet to touch on that, but I think that's just as important. Like, it's not the case that there aren't other bands that are metal based, but Britain holds so much importance in this movement because more than likely the politics of the time. I mean, the 80s was filled with polarization and racism across, and just no way or knowledge on how to handle it. There was sort of the removing of the unions, and politics was in an absolute dire state. But we were done with the punk era. We wanted that gone. Like we'd had our moment of anger and hating everybody, and now we just wanted something to get us through recessions and other economic hardship. And Britain handled it so well because it channeled it into creativity and created the best music to date, of which never makes any reference really to the time. It doesn't make any specific.
It's truly timeless.
People. It just presents a message, and no one across the world had the same environment as we did, so they just couldn't replicate it. They could follow the style musically, they couldn't replicate the emotion that came with it. I think that's just as important as instrumentalism. Yeah,
Diamond Head are another big one of the time. They basically spawned thrash and Metallica and Megadeth both cite Diamond Head as one of the biggest influences of theirs. People actually still think I Am Evil was written by Metallica, which is just embarrassing. It was written by Diamond Head, if you think that.
I had. Whoops.
That's pretty cool. They're quite unfortunately they were a little bit mismanaged by the lead singer's mother, and so they never really reached the fame they should have. But
they're still super fucking good. I remember I was in a lot of pain when I watched them because my back had decided to die, so I was stoned off my nut on painkillers, just sat in one of the festival tents leaning against a pole like, these are great.
Am I evil?
Yeah. I almost fell asleep, but I promised Diamond Head that is not because of anything to do with you. I was just off it.
It was just the pills. Rainbow, another big one, and lastly, Black Sabbath also brought back Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules during the Nwabum era, and it's quite quite typical of that style. Funny that Black Sabbath obviously basically birthed heavy metal, and they were like, "Whoa, there's another wave coming." Ride that.
Heaven and Hell was one of the best albums ever written. It's obviously one of my favorites, as I've expressed many times.
It's Dio singing on it, isn't it?
It's featured Dio as the lead singer, and obviously I'm a big fan of Dio as the Sabbath singer, as is my dad, as we saw recently. Oh god, don't start playing stuff out loud. I accidentally clicked on a YouTube video. Let's just play Heaven and Hell for the next 6 minutes. But I love this album. Produces some of the most fundamental songs to my family. So even my nan will be found singing this at times. So I think that holds a lot.
Yeah, and it's a classic, you know, Sabbath. If Sabbath's getting involved, it must be pretty important. Unfortunately, the great success of Def Leppard's Pyromania, especially in the US, basically brought the whole new wave British heavy metal to an end. It just wasn't as popular in England as it was in America. Kiss were getting really popular, and glam metal basically became the scene.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of glam. I can't critique glam. It's one of my favorite genres, but it did bring an end to an era to produce a new one. And while I think they're both important, the politics behind new wave was lost. It just became about making money and selling records, and I don't think we've ever managed to get that back. So big rip to that.
Yeah. I mean, Def Leppard are from Sheffield, and they literally have I think that one of the songs on their first album is called Hello America. Typical. Bloody traitors, I'm not.
Yeah, and I mean...
They saw a bit of success in America and suckled from the teat and basically brought the movement to an end in the UK. But
Pyromania contains quite possibly some of my least favourite rock and metal songs of all time. I hate Stage
It's not
Fright.
my favourite album either.
I hate Photograph. I hate...
Rock of Ages!
I hate it with a burning passion. Once they created the theatre production of Rock of Ages, I kept hearing it all the time. And everyone being like, oh, Tanya, you're like this. I'm like, fuck off. It's not suddenly been written in the 2000s. It was produced in the 80s. Go fuck yourself.
Yeah. Not really my bag either. I'm not massive on glam. There's some stuff I don't mind.
Don't get me wrong.
Molly Crew's pretty funny.
Def Leppard, though, leave. Get out.
Yeah. So, where to go next? If you like the sounds of new wave British heavy metal and you've listened to what all the albums we've suggested, I think given how influential Nwabam actually was, there are so many bands you can listen to, and with some knowledge under your belt, you can definitely pick out the influences. Megadeth and Metallica we mentioned earlier. I know they're not your biggest fan, but thrash metal was basically spawned off Diamond Head and various other Nwabam bands and became obviously huge. A few other ones, power metal, Iron Maiden basically brought that around with Power Slave. Black metal as well takes a lot of influences from Nwabam, riffy. I suppose stoner metal does as well. Lots of metal. We could sit here all day and just be like, this is clearly taking some influence from Angel Witch.
I think the best influence to come out of it was thrash metal for me personally, and
I think that's the main one.
All the things that I've complained about in terms of what was lost thanks to fucking Def Leppard, some of it still lived on in bands like Slayer. Now, that's obviously go to Babby's first thrash band. It's not particularly deep. It's very mainstream, but Slayer are fucking Slayer. They're good. And they still have those themes of anger, aggression, symbolism, whilst also still creating some really, really good music and toured the world for years off the back of it. I mean, they've now sort of retired, and luckily I was able to see them before they did. But that feeling of which I spoke about being lost can still kind of be found there. Now, sort of glam is a great spin-off. I'm not a big fan of black metal, but I know it's produced huge amounts of albums across the world and a whole genre in itself. But thrash, in terms of the sort of link between worlds, is definitely the way to go. If you're a big fan of the new wave, stick to thrash. That's my personal recommendation.
Yeah, the vocals particularly, you can really hear, and just the riffs and the speed behind it all. It's very clearly influenced from Nwabam, and I mean, to be fair, there's enough here to keep you going without even needing to leave the 80s. But
yeah, pretty much.
but obviously there's loads of bands that are worth exploring. And my last suggestion that I have to make, if you like the new wave British heavy metal and you like glam, watch Spinal Tap, the film, because it's a classic. It basically takes the piss out of the whole new wave and glam periods, and it's just fantastic. Really, nothing comes close to it.
If you've grown to love this type of music, and you're confident enough in your love of said music, watch Spinal Tap to get shat on for a couple hours.
Yeah, it's 1984. I mean, it's in the period. It's very accurate, and it just does the satire so perfectly. It's the Metalhead's film.
That's one thing to be taken away again from this style of music, is it doesn't take itself too seriously, to the point where Spinal Tap could exist and it wasn't exactly too controversial, because punk was really, really serious. And like, you can't take away from the fact that punk was a political movement within itself. It held itself really, really close to heart, and every song that was made with an agenda towards a person or a policy. That's how punk was. It was fuck the system in these specific areas, right? Normally towards the sort of right of politics. But metal managed to keep that while sort of bringing back that seriousness and taking it away a little bit and reminding people that this is supposed to be about us enjoying music. This isn't supposed to be about us having an agenda. It's about sitting down with friends, listening to albums. So Spinal Tap,
the themes are almost escapist, you know.
Exactly.
Saxon are like LARPing is like, you know, invaders of, you know, that kind of thing. Like,
I didn't think we were going to talk about LARPing on the Rams fucking podcast, but here we are.
You know, they're all swords and denim and leather and and this yeah. It's fun behind the music.
Yeah, and they managed to bring that back, which is just so important to revitalize music. People were getting sick and tired of punk. They didn't want that put in their face all day, every day, being told what to think. So while metal still has... Pardon?
They wanted the Smiths.
No. Ew.
I like the Smiths. But I also like the new wave of British heavy metal.
And it brings back enjoying music with friends.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
As groups of people, as fan groups. There's no arguments, really. There was, but there's not meant to be any arguments. There's not meant to be any competition. It's supposed to be music. And that can only really be made by the British populace, because everyone else who started producing music was too divided. America producing the rock and glam that it did was too divided. It still managed to include politics within its ranks. Britain was just fucking done with it at that point and just wanted fun.
Wanted some heavy riffs. And who doesn't want that?
Yeah, they just wanted to listen to music in a venue, run the fuck into each other, beat each other up for a bit, and then walk out as brothers. That's what new wave is.
Classic. Well, I hope everyone who's listened has had a nice introduction, a smooth intro to what I feel is a somewhat underrated movement, because people just don't know what it is, really. They might know...
Not highlighted as independent. I think that's the takeaway from this, is that new wave British heavy metal don't conglomerate in with the American version. Like, there is something special to be found with music produced in Britain specifically. So the separation of it is really the message to take home today.
And people hear names like Iron Maiden and think, oh, metal from the 80s, but they were just one part of this huge movement that basically characterized metal in the 80s effectively, and characterizes most music today, and loads of metal today stems from it. And you can really hear the influences. Once you know what you're listening for, you can recognize it. And watch Spinal Tap.
We'll end on that. Watch Spinal Tap. It's important.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. And thanks Tanya.
Thank you.
Stream Wizard.
Thank you for scripting it and making sure that I don't get too lost in reminiscing.
It's okay. Everyone likes a bit of new wave. Maybe we'll have an episode on actual new wave.
Yeah. We'll hopefully see you soon. Enjoy Judas Priest on your now list of things to listen to.
Enjoy your new list. Have a good one, everyone.
Bye.